Chapter 29. The 7 Pleiades and the 7 Rishis. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Job 38:31. There I beheld 7 stars, like great blazing mountains, and like spirits entreating me. Book of Enoch 18:14. The constellation Taurus, the bull, contains over 400 stars, among which there are said to be more bright stars than in any other constellation, and chief among which are the 7 Pleiades and their sisters the 5 Hyades. And since in every age this constellation has been a favorite theme for myth and allegory, we may well expect to find an important occult significance connected with it. One myth is that these 12 sisters saw their brother Hyas killed by a snake while hunting in Libya. They lamented his death so passionately that Zeus, out of compassion, translated them into stars, 5 into the Hyades in the head and 7 into the Pleiades in the neck of the bull. The Hyades are called the rainy ones, and the greatest importance is attached to this group when it rises at the same time as the sun, namely during the month of May, at which time the rainy season begins. We therefore find that among the ancients the Hyades represent the fertilizing principle of moisture. They symbolized the feminine or astral aspect of the 5 senses, which lament that their brother, the physical senses, is so deadened by the snake of matter and the perversion of the creative powers, that they are cut off from him and must remain in the higher realms, that he can no longer commune with them except as he reaches up into the heaven world. They continually exert, however, the gentle moisture of their fertilizing principle, which like dew falls from heaven or the astral world and helps man to find the 7 spiritual senses represented by the Pleiades. The physical and astral senses should be in such harmonious accord and development that when we see a physical object we should also see its astral counterpart. When we hear a physical sound, we should also hear its astral expression, and so on with each of the other senses. Another myth has it that the 7 Pleiades and their mother met the hunter Orion one day in the woods. The sight of their beauty so inflamed his desires that for 5 years he pursued them through the dense forest, now losing sight of them and now seeing them flying before him. Finally, Zeus in pity turned them into white doves, which flew to heaven and were translated into stars, although during the flight one dove was lost among the wandering rocks. Homer in the Odyssey 12:6 alludes to them as the doves who brought ambrosia from the west. Since doves always symbolize the spirit, we have no difficulty in connecting the Pleiades with spiritual forces or the perfection and spiritualization of man's 7 senses. While the spiritual sun rises in the mystical east, we are told that it must shine even unto the west. And it is man who, by the unfoldment of his 7 spiritual senses, must bring back from the farthest point of manifestation, matter, the ambrosia or sustenance of the gods with which to nourish his immortal body. Orion is represented in mythology as a giant with a girdle, a sword, a lion's skin, and a club, while his dog Sirius follows him and the Pleiades fly before him. Orion here represents man in pursuit of the higher attainments of the spiritual senses. He is indeed a giant girded with strength. A girdle is a symbol of a priestly office. Thus, when Aaron and his son were anointed as priests, they received the girdle of linen thread of 3 colors, blue, purple, and scarlet, as does the Brahmin boy in India today when initiated into his caste. As the Celtic word for a belt is krios, so the Celtic name for Christ is Krios D, meaning belt god. This belt named all Druids, who were identified with the sun and its continuous activity. All words like belt, gur-th, bandi, and gurdi name the same daily orbit of the sun, which in the picture language costume of the Druids was the gilded belt. 2. The girdle is also a covenant of strength and represents the current of spiritual force which circles around man's body just below the breasts. Thus Isaiah says, I will clothe him with thy robe, and strengthen him with thy girdle. Again, and righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. Also, the Son of Man who stood in the midst of the 7 candlesticks is described in Revelation as girt about the paps with a golden girdle. For when man can hold the 7 stars in his right hand, his girdle will be a visible current of spiritual life force passing through his heart, through the life center in the right breast, and through the center of illumination in the spinal cord opposite the heart. The sword of Orion symbolizes the power of man's dominion over the earth, obtained by fighting and struggling with the density of physical conditions. This is the sword of the Spirit through whose right use man may win his way back to his former high spiritual estate in Eden. The lion symbolizes spiritual courage, strength, and love, the only forces, represented by the lion of the tribe of Judah, found worthy to open the seals of the great book of life, Revelation v. 5. We have already explained the aspect of man represented by the lion, but Orion represents man as he is today with his 5-fold development, forever pursuing his 7 spiritual powers with eager passion, yet never quite able to attain them. Hence, instead of having attained the real, inner powers of the lion, he is able to manifest only their lower or outer expression, i.e., the lion's skin. In other words, with courage, strength, and love, man persistently follows the flashing wings of the spiritual doves through the shadows of the forest of life, yet because his courage partakes of recklessness, his strength is tainted with cruelty, and his love inflamed by passion, he never fully attains, and will not until he, too, finds his place in the heaven world. Orion's club symbolizes man's physical power and personal will. For, alas, man too often hopes to claim his heritage through mere physical prowess and personal will, instead of by the use of the sword of spirit. His dog Sirius represents man's animal nature, trained to keep its appointed place, for like a faithful dog it should follow where man leads and be his friend and helper. As Orion unsuccessfully pursues the heavenly doves for 5 years, so will man unsuccessfully pursue his higher spiritual attainments through the 5 periods during which his physical senses rule. Only when his 6th and 7th senses begin to unfold and Zeus transforms him into a star and he enters the heavenly realms, will he find the doves. The Pleiades appear in the northern heavens at the beginning of spring, and wield a mighty influence over the earth and its inhabitants. Not only do we find Job recognizing the power of their influence, but it was generally taught by the ancient sages that this group ruled over the 7 races and sub-races of mankind, determining also the great changes which accompany the beginnings and endings of the racial and planetary cycles. The Hottentots worship the Pleiades, celebrating their annual appearance above the eastern horizon with great rejoicing. As soon as the constellation appears, all the mothers, with their children, ascend the nearest hill and teach the children to stretch out their arms toward the friendly stars. They also worship the Hyades under the name Tuzib, the rain god. They call the stars the souls of the deceased. According to the Greek legend, the Pleiades are the 7 daughters of Atlas and Pleione. In one version, all save Merope married gods and became mothers of the famous heroes who founded cities, nations, and subraces. Merope married a mortal and hence is said to hide her head in shame. They are regarded by Madler and others, in astronomy, as the central group of the system of the Milky Way. The Pleiades are thus considered, even in astronomy, as the central point around which our universe of fixed stars revolves, the focus from which, and into which, the divine breath, motion, works incessantly during the Manvantara. These influences, however, must always be considered in connection with their positive aspects or executors, the 7 stars in the constellation Ursa Major or the Great Bear. There were 2 constellations with 7 stars each. We call them the 2 bears. But the stars of the Lesser Bear were once considered to be the 7 heads of the polar dragon. In Egypt, the Great Bear was the constellation of Typhon. These stars are called the Sapta Rishi or 7 Rishis. Although Ursa Major was catalogued by Ptolemy as having 8 stars and by Hevelius as having 12, nevertheless its 7 brightest stars constitute one of the most characteristic figures in the northern sky, and are called by the Hindus the husbands of the Pleiades. The fact that so many of the ancient writers mentioned only the Pleiades, the Rishis, the Hyades, and Orion, led modern astronomers for a long time to believe that these were the only constellations known in those ancient days. But recent scientific discoveries are corroborating so many of the old myths, legends, and allegories that it is easily understood that only these groups were mentioned by the ancients, because these were of the greatest importance from a mystical and occult standpoint. Modern research has plainly shown that the stars surrounding us do not constitute a simple, but a double system, a fact that was well known to the sages. For it has been shown that many stars widely separated and apparently belonging to separate systems are mysteriously related to each other, especially the Pleiades and the Great Bear. It seems difficult to account for the very remarkable and unsystematized distribution of the motions, unless we suppose that the stars form 2 more or less separate systems superimposed. And it has been found possible by assuming 2 drifts with suitably assigned velocities to account very satisfactorily for the observed motions. During the present Iron Age, it is the masculine, positive force of these Rishis that has been dominant, rather than the feminine force of the Pleiades. For the influence of the Pleiades is exerted less upon the immediate events in the mundane sphere than upon the higher planes. Yet it is always the feminine force which brings forth the great changes which appear on Earth as the dominance of the cycle of one subrace gives place to the next. For corresponding reasons, during this cycle only the masculine masters of wisdom manifest in earth conditions, the feminine masters working in the higher realms. Meanwhile, it is the 7 Rishis who mark the time and duration of events in our septenary life cycle. They are as mysterious as their supposed wives, the Pleiades. In fact, it is largely the positive and negative powers emanating from these 2 constellations that give to number 7 its mystical significance. Again, number 7 is closely connected with the occult significance of the Pleiades, the 6 visible, or the 7 actual sisters, the Pleiades, are needed for the completion of this most secret and mysterious of all astronomical and religious symbols. The importance of this constellation in laying the foundation of the universe is illustrated in the book of Job 11 when Saturn, the great initiator, demands of the candidate the mystery questions which will reveal his knowledge of the secret cycles and the spiritual significance of the influences emanating from the Mazzaroth. The ability to understand, correlate with and bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades is there indicated as a necessary requirement for initiation of both man and the planet. As the Pleiades are connected with the closing of cycles, as their number 7, perfection, indicates, they have to do with the tests which each soul must pass ere it can evolve out of one cycle of spiritual unfoldment into the next. Hence, to bind their influence means that the candidate must have gained the power to face the karma of his old or closing cycle and successfully pass through the changes which the steps of initiation inevitably bring. This power is gained by assimilating the sweet influences of love, compassion, faith, intrepidity, action, patience, and devotion focused by the Pleiades. By the Hindus, the Pleiades are called the nurses of the planet Mars, the commander of the celestial armies. In India, they are connected with their nursling, the war god, Kartikeya. It was the Pleiades who gave this name to the god, Kartikeya being the planet Mars, astronomically. This should give to the student of astrology an insight into the deeper significance of that greatly maligned planet Mars. For as the commander of the celestial armies, we must look to his influence for the courage, fortitude, strength, and the dauntless energy that will carry us on to final victory. In fact, the true mystic teachings in regard to that planet will be revealed to man only when the seventh sister comes from her hiding and begins to unroll the scroll of the seventh great race. The allegory of Niobe, the sudden death of whose 7 sons and 7 daughters, symbolizing the 7 subraces of the Atlanteans and their 7 branches, also refers to the cataclysms which occur at the close of the great race cycles, for she was a daughter of one of the Pleiades. Investigation by modern astronomers has confirmed the occult teaching that at the time the Pyramid of Cheops was built, the Pleiades were directly overhead. These were the forces drawn upon by the giants who accomplished that work over 31,000 years ago. According to Stenson Jarvis, the 7 branches of the church and the accompanying colonies were recorded through the descent from the 7 daughters who named the stars of the Pleiades. The reader will remember that the great fire signal which exhibited the deity's consent for further life on earth was not given until the Pleiades were exactly overhead in the night sky. The constellation was a center of the priestly heavens, and had the most honorable position on the neck of the constellation Taurus, who represented the bull and thunder god of England. And when Homer names this famous constellation, he writes the name to make it fit the meter as Te. Lu. Iades, using the whole word Pe to make another syllable, and also to name the dove, which was always the name of Venus and the sign of divine Lo.ve. The Druid college which prepared the missionaries was on the island called the Island Dove of Heaven, and the Greek name of the dove or pigeon was specially made as Peleia, and Homer's writing it as Pleiades names these stars as the dove gods, or priests, because all Druid missions carried a message of love, referred to in Job as the sweet influences of these stars. The geographical uses of the Pleiades were partly as follows. The 7 parts of the early church, as spread out over the world, were here named and pictured in one cluster, each star or sign of honor, being named as a daughter. These daughters are married to the male British deities whose name are weekdays, and they bear children whose names are the patronymics or father names of great and well-known peoples, such as Dardanus, Lacedaemon, etc. And in this way it becomes clear that the whole arrangement about to be described was a part of the memory systems which the Druids and their branch priests used to record all kinds of information. It was the invention and memory system of the one church, the one candlestick of 7 branches, which as a picture was not exclusively Hebraic. As we know that the Pleiades were held sacred from Peru to Java, and that these 7 stars received the names of the 7 branches of the church, it is clear that the system embraced the earth. With all this symbolic myth and legend, we must conclude that the sweet influences of the Pleiades are something that every soul should expect as a part of its heritage. But they can be attained only when the soul is able to face the great initiator Saturn and answer his questions. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Those sweet influences can never be ours until we can loose the bands which hold us to the limitations of the personality. In fact, it is the loosing of these bands which is the great purpose of evolution, and which is indicated by the digits from 1 to 9. Only when we reach number 9 and face our initiation and successfully answer these questions can we become more than man.